or to what, I don't care, because it works successfully. You know, I have an old saying that I use for what it's worth, and you can use it in the future, Mike, is that I think that news is for the uninformed, not the informed.
When somebody who is uninformed watches your 11 o'clock news show, are they any more informed, really, at the end than at the beginning? That's the question.
I think so. I think they know what's happened in the world, they know what's happened in their market, they know what's happened that surrounds them.
But is Cogden right? A detailed analysis of his 11 p.m. newscast on Thursday, January 24th, the day we chose at random, showed that viewers who watched KGO would hardly have learned what was happening in the world, for on a day when all these news stories broke, KGO had only 58 seconds of national news on their highest-rated newscast. No foreign news. What they did have time for was this.
The nude centerfold for Cosmopolitan magazine. The Playgirl Mother of the Month with another nude male. Nudity on the beach, and the Nashville Stomper, the fellow who had a fetish about stepping on women's insteps. 4 minutes and 25 seconds of sex, 2 minutes and 28 seconds of crime, 40 seconds of exorcism. No wonder. I mean, it's a tabloid. At 11 o'clock, it almost becomes a kind of vaudeville, right?
Isn't fire, crime, and sex news? When did that get out of the news business? When do we have to dwell on the problems in the Middle East over and over and over again? When do we have to dwell on the Cambodian situation over and over again when there is other news going on? Isn't fire, crime, and sex news?
Sure.
I think we all deal in that. Even the esteemed New York Times, you know, has to put a little sex in there once in a while, somewhere on the back page. The easiest thing in the world to criticize is news. And we could sit around and do pontifical kind of news day in and day out. We'd be back where we were in the old days when we were trying to be very clever and profound about news and died and nobody watched it.
Van Amberg is KGO's anchorman and executive editor, and he has a theory about the success of KGO News.
It has to do with the fact that I try to relate, I try to talk, that I do get involved, that I do solve problems, that we do things, that we get the old lady the house that she's been burned out of, that we get the money for the kid who's dying from leukemia, we get him an operation that he would not have gotten if we hadn't been here.
So it's not really a traditional news show in any sense?
Absolutely not, no.
Okay.
No, the traditional news show is the kind that we knocked off the air here. The plastic cutout people who could not ad-lib, who didn't live their stories, who came in and read. I could never do that. I have to be involved.
One of your colleagues says that what you did was just exactly what KGO call letters stand for. Kickers, guts, orgasm.
Well, that's an easy thing to say, and it's kind of cute, as a matter of fact. I think he's absolutely wrong. We're much more than that. Look, we wouldn't have won Peabody Awards or the Emmy, really. That was decided by people in Washington, D.C., not people in San Francisco who maybe see kickers and guts and orgasms, if that's what he's talking about. I wouldn't have won the Press Club Award the last 2 years in a row because of very in-depth stories that I've done, Broadcast Journalist of the Year. If all I was doing is coming out with kickers, guts, and orgasms. Let me tell you something. I led with a story one night on the 11 o'clock show. I don't know if you know this. It was about a human male sexual organ that was laying beside a railroad track in the East Bay.
I remember there was a tease that went ahead of it, said, male genital found on railroad tracks, stay tuned.
Something to that's not exactly right. It was longer than that. It took 20 seconds to tell it, and it wasn't quite that blunt, and we weren't trying to grab an audience. Here's the thing, though.
You weren't trying to grab an audience?
We were trying to inform an audience. At that time, the Santa Cruz murders were going on. Now, if we had found a finger beside a railroad track in the East Bay, we would have had it on. Now, I was not uptight about the fact that it was a male sexual organ. I mean, to me, there was a victim somewhere. Something had happened. This was grabbed by many members of the press and said, hey, look what they're doing to grab audience. We didn't cut that thing off and put it over there.
In the Bay Area, Amberg and his anchor team are to KGO what Willie Mays was to the Giants, and they're rewarded handsomely, too. A reported $300,000 a year in combined salaries. If that seems a lot, remember that 70% of KGO's profits come from local programming, of which news is the most important part. When you're dealing in millions and millions of dollars, it's good business to keep your star players well fed. The payroll is not that large across town, but neither are the ratings.
KPIX News just a couple of years ago was the best in San Francisco and the most successful. It was a model for local news operations around the country. Well, then the KGO pack drove them from the top. KPIX panicked, ratings plummeted, and so did morale.
29 people left KPIX News within a 90-day period last year. Some were fired, Others quit because they disagreed with the station's news policy. Among the new faces at the station are the anchor team itself, which debuted the last week in January. One half of the team, the man with the beard, almost didn't make it. He worked for ABC in Los Angeles until he left to join KPIX. So ABC, which owns KGO, sued to stop him from appearing on KPIX. It's settled now, but it illustrates how competitive is local television news. KPIX news director Jim Van Messel came to San Francisco from a station in Detroit, where he had helped build a winning news organization. And now he is trying to do the same thing for KPIX.
Would it be accurate to characterize what KGO does, particularly at 11 o'clock, as tabloid?
Yes.
Okay. Tabloid because there's lots of sex, violence, tearjerkers, crime, right? Would it be inaccurate to characterize what you people do as tabloid?
I think so. I think so.
Well, we cataloged for Van Messel just what KPIX had put on its 11 p.m. news the previous week. It turned out they had followed KGO's lead in going tabloid.
Actually, your percentages of fire, crime, sex, tearjerkers, and animal stories was as big or bigger than KGO last week.
I would respond, I don't know where you got your figures or whatever.
We got our figures. We taped every show from 4:30 on.
Not important. Point I make is I don't know that I necessarily call all crime tabloid. I don't know that I call exorcism, by definition, tabloid. I don't know the substance and the specifics of those stories to say that they weren't necessarily relevant and should have been part of a newscast. I don't buy it. I don't buy it in that form.
65 seconds. Here's just an example. Here's 65 seconds on the Nashville Stomper. Hornyville, North Carolina, massage parlor where the masseurs tickled everything, including the fancy of the subject. That was 55 seconds. Would you agree that's tabloid?
Sure. As they stand isolated, I would agree. Let me get back to what I'm saying. You don't save souls in an empty church.
If you had your druthers, you could put on any kind of a local news show you wanted. Honest. What would you do?
It would be probably very similar on a local level to what CBS News is doing nationally. I am convinced that...
You're probably convinced that nobody might watch it locally.
Not probably convinced.
Absolutely convinced.
Absolutely convinced.
7 years ago, KRON-TV News led all the rest here in San Francisco. Then they fell to second place and then to third. They have been struggling expensively and unsuccessfully with formats and anchormen and with ratings.
KRON's news, new as of January 1st, is promoted as having never a dull moment. So far, the slogan doesn't fit. KRON's newscast is the most traditional of the three San Francisco stations, probably the most informative, and perhaps the least entertaining. Pep Cooney, the general manager, and Al Constant, the president, are resisting a KGO style, something they dallied with 2 years ago.
Mr. Constant, a little while back, you people ran an ad, News Hounds. You got your various anchor people and reporters. You look embarrassed even as I describe what you did. And you had them put on dog heads. And you advertised them in the local papers, the News Hounds of Channel 4.
We started that campaign in order to get some people to watch our news programming. They weren't watching. Our ratings were pretty bad.
We did that type of a campaign for one reason, a couple reasons, but for one reason, we saw it work in our competition on a gimmick type of promotional campaign.
You mean the KGO Cowboy
the Cowboys
promotion?
Primarily, yeah. And the campaign was designed for in and out 4 or 5 weeks only, and that was going to be the end of it. It was the end of it.
It's a difficult thing, really, to be in a market, see a television station achieve high ratings, with what we feel, at KRON-TV at least, are not good journalism standards.
You're talking about KGO.
Well, yes. We avoid some stories and handle them in a very delicate way in order to get away from that kind of a label.
All right, that's perfectly true. It shows in our results. Fire, crime, and sex, 8% of all of the total programs that we covered. Was this a specific decision made by management, made by you, Mr. Constant, Mr. Cooney, to stay away from that kind of thing?
Yes. Our news director feels that way, that sensationalism in the news is not a proper journalistic standard.
And meantime, your ratings don't respond, they don't go up, your revenues are down, and you're willing to stand there like a rock and say, let the ship go down?
We're not going to bastardize our news for ratings.
In the early days of television,